The first time Olivia saw the smoke, it curled like a dark omen against the pale Wyoming sky. She stood at the edge of her property, boots planted in dry prairie grass, watching the distant plume rise and smear the morning light. The railroad had returned. 3 years ago, the iron beast had taken her husband. Daniel had been a foreman strong, laughing, stubborn enough to believe that steel tracks meant progress. The day the boiler exploded, the sky had shaken with thunder that did not belong to God. By sundown, she was a widow. The company called it an accident. Olivia called it murder. Now the railroad was back to finish what it had started, a line cutting straight through the valley, through her land, through every memory she had left. She tightened her grip on the small leather satchel hidden beneath her shawl. Inside were blasting caps Daniel once kept for clearing rock. She had taken them the night before the funeral. At the time, she hadn't known why. Now she did. The whistle echoed, faint and distant. "Closer than yesterday, they won't take another thing from me," she whispered. By midday, the camp had sprung up like a rash along the hills. Tents, supply wagons, men shouting over the clank of metal and snorting horses. Olivia rode into town with her hat low, her face unreadable. The saloon was thick with dust and gossip. That new engineer's a sharp one, someone muttered. Named Cyrus Bennett. Came down from Montana. Smart as they come. Olivia's hand paused on her glass. Engineer. The man responsible for laying the final stretch. The man responsible for finishing what killed her husband. She turned slowly. Cyrus stood near the bar, tall and broad-shouldered, dark hair catching the lamplight. He wasn't laughing like the others. He studied blueprints spread across a table, brow furrowed in concentration. He looked younger than she expected. Not cruel, not careless, human. Her jaw tightened. Humanity did not absolve guilt. As if sensing her stare, Cyrus glanced up. Their eyes met hers, cool and steady. He tipped his hat slightly. Polite. She didn't respond. Instead, she finished her drink and walked out into the sun, pulse pounding. That night, beneath a moon thin as a blade, Olivia crept toward the half-laid tracks. The workers had retired. Only a lantern burned near the supply wagon. She knelt beside the rail joint. Daniel would have inspected with pride. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the memory of him. Her hands trembled as she placed the cap and wired it beneath the steel. She'd learned enough from watching Daniel to know where it would cause the most damage without killing anyone. She didn't want blood. She wanted delay, loss, fear. She wanted them to feel powerless. A twig snapped behind her. She froze. "Ma'am." The voice was low, calm. Olivia stood slowly and turned. Cyrus Bennett stepped forward from the shadows, lantern light catching in his eyes. "You're a long way from town," he said gently. "So are you," she replied. His gaze drifted to the tracks, then back to her face. Something flickered in his expression. Not suspicion, concern. "Railroads. Dangerous work at night." "I'm not afraid of railroads." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded toward her horse. "Let me walk you back. There's coyotes out here." "I can handle coyotes." A hint of a smile touched his mouth. "I imagine you can." Silence stretched between them, taut as wire. He didn't see the wire at her feet, didn't see the fury coiled beneath her calm. Finally, he stepped back. "Suit yourself, ma'am." He tipped his hat again and turned away. Olivia waited until he disappeared into the dark before sinking to her knees. Her heart thundered so loudly, she feared it might ignite the charge on its own. She finished her work quickly, covering her tracks with sand and dirt. By dawn, she stood on a distant ridge as the crew began their morning tasks. Cyrus barked orders with steady authority. The locomotive crept forward cautiously. Then, a sharp crack split the air. Metal shrieked. Smoke burst skyward. Men shouted. The rail twisted upward like a wounded serpent, halting the engine in a violent lurch. No one died, but work stopped. Cyrus stared at the damage, jaw tight, scanning the horizon. For a fleeting moment, Olivia felt triumph. Then, Cyrus removed his hat and surveyed the shaken men, checking each one carefully. relief washing over his features when he found them alive. He looked responsible, steady, not like a villain. The sensation unsettled her. As she rode back toward her house, wind whipping her hair loose, a single troubling thought followed her. What if the enemy wasn't as heartless as she'd imagined? And what if that made everything harder? The damage took 3 days to repair. 3 long days, where Cyrus barely slept. Olivia watched from a distance, more than she cared to admit. She told herself she was studying her enemy, nothing more. From the ridge near her property, she could see the workers moving like ants along the twisted rail. Cyrus was always among them, not shouting from safety, but lifting steel, checking bolts, wiping sweat from his brow. Like any other man, he spoke quietly, but firmly. When tempers flared, he cooled them. When fear lingered, he steadied it. Careful. With that joint, she heard him call one afternoon as she passed close enough to listen. We're not here to rush. We're here to build something that lasts. The words struck her harder than she expected. Daniel used to say the same thing. Build something that lasts. She clenched her jaw and rode on. That evening, a storm rolled in without warning. The prairie sky darkened to bruised purple, and wind whipped dust into spirals. Olivia had just secured her barn doors when the first crack of thunder split the air. Then she saw it. A lone rider, struggling against the wind near the bend of Cottonwood Creek. Her breath caught. With Cyrus, his horse reared as lightning flashed too close for comfort. The animal bolted, throwing him hard into the mud. Olivia didn't think. She ran. By the time she reached him, rain lashed sideways and the creek swelled dangerously. Cyrus tried to stand, but stumbled, clutching his shoulder. Easy, she said sharply, grabbing his arm before he fell again. He blinked up at her through rain-soaked lashes. Recognition dawned. You again. You've a talent for poor timing, she muttered. He attempted a grin, but winced instead. Horse spooked. No surprise. Thunder boomed. Closer now. We need shelter, she said. My place isn't far. He hesitated, only a second, before nodding. She half supported him the rest of the way, his weight solid and steady against her side. Even injured, he didn't complain. Inside her cabin, she lit a lantern and set him in a chair near the stove. Shirt, she ordered. His brow lifted slightly, but he obeyed, carefully pulling the soaked fabric over his head. Her breath caught not at the sight of him, but at the deep purple bruise already forming along his shoulder and ribs. That'll hurt tomorrow, she said. Reckon it will. She fetched a cloth and warm water, her hands surprisingly gentle as she cleaned the mud from his skin. You don't seem fond of the railroad, he observed quietly. Her hands paused. I'm not fond of what it costs. He studied her face, rain tapping softly against the roof. It's not meant to cost lives. Tell that to my husband. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Silence fell heavy between them. Cyrus's expression, changing out, defensive, not dismissive. I'm sorry, he said simply. She expected excuses, company lines, justifications. Instead, there was only sincerity. Boiler accident, he asked gently. She nodded once. I read the reports, he said. Poor maintenance. They cut corners before I took this post. Anger flared. And now you fix their mistakes. I try. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, something quieter shifted. You could have died tonight, she said after a moment. Would have been foolish. Foolish men build railroads. He huffed a faint laugh. Stubborn ones, maybe. She wrapped his shoulder firmly with clean cloth. When she stepped back, their eyes met again. Closer now. Too close. You sabotaged that rail, didn't you? He asked softly. Her heart slammed. She forced her expression into calm indifference. You accusing me. I'm observing you. And what do you see? He held her gaze a long moment. Grief. The word pierced deeper than any accusation. She turned away sharply, busying herself with the stove. You should rest, she said. Storm won't clear till morning. And you? He asked. I don't sleep much. He didn't press further. Later, when she thought he'd fallen asleep on the narrow cot near the wall, she stood by the window, watching lightning streak across the plains. She could end this. He was injured, vulnerable. The satchel with the remaining caps rested in the cupboard. But as thunder rolled low and distant, She looked at the man breathing steadily behind her. He had thanked her. He had apologized. He had not once spoken ill of her anger. The lines she'd drawn in the dust were beginning to blur. And for the first time since Daniel's death, Olivia felt something unfamiliar stir beneath the weight of vengeance. Doubt. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world scrubbed clean and glittering with dew. Cyrus insisted on leaving before the sun fully crested the hills. "I've already caused enough trouble," he said, carefully shrugging into his dry shirt. "You falling off a horse isn't my concern," Olivia replied, though she stood closer than necessary as she checked the wrap around his shoulder. He smiled faintly. "You keep saying things like that, and you keep misunderstanding them." Outside, the prairie stretched wide and endless, the rails in the distance catching early light like a silver scar. He followed her gaze. "I know you hate what that line represents," he said quietly. "But it's coming, Olivia." It was the first time he'd said her name. It unsettled her more than the storm had. "Progress doesn't ask permission," he continued. "But it can be built better than it has been." "Built better," she snapped. "By the same company that buried my husband with a 2-line apology." Cyrus didn't flinch. "I'm not. The company, no," she agreed coldly. "You're just the man finishing their work." Silence lingered between them. Finally, he mounted the spare horse she'd offered. "I'll make sure they compensate families properly from here on," he said. "You have my word," she almost laughed. "Your word won't bring Daniel back." "No," he admitted, "but it might keep another woman from standing where you stand." That struck deeper than she expected. Without another word, he tipped his hat and rode toward the rising smoke of camp. Olivia watched until he disappeared over the ridge. Then she turned toward the cupboard. The remaining blasting caps felt heavier in her hands now. The next sabotage was not planned. It was anger. 2 days later, company officials arrived, well-dressed men in polished boots, who walked the valley like they already owned it. One of them gestured broadly toward her property. "This section cuts straight through here," he said. "Minimal relocation costs." Relocation, as if her home were a misplaced fence post. She stood unseen behind a cottonwood tree, fury burning hot and blinding. That night, she moved again. This time, she wired a supply wagon instead of the rail, enough to destroy timber and tools, enough to cost the company money. She struck the match with steady fingers. The explosion came just before dawn. Flames leaped high, devouring crates and blueprints. Horses screamed and broke their tethers. Men scrambled with buckets. Olivia watched from the tree line, heart pounding not with triumph, but with something closer to desperation. Then she saw Cyrus. He ran toward the fire without hesitation, pulling a trapped worker free before the wagon collapsed inward. Smoke blackened his face, and he coughed hard but kept moving, organizing the men, preventing panic. When the flames finally died, he stood amid the wreckage, chest heaving. And then he looked straight toward the trees, toward her. Even from that distance, she felt it. He knew. That evening, he came alone. No lantern, no accusation. He stopped several feet from her porch. "You could have killed someone," he said quietly. "I didn't." "That wasn't the question." She stepped down to face him, chin lifted. "They were going to take my land. They still might. Then maybe they should learn it's not free." His jaw tightened. "You think burning wagons will stop them? It won't. It'll bring armed guards. It'll bring men who don't care whether you live here or not." "I don't care what it brings." "That's not true." She faltered, just slightly. He stepped closer. "You're not reckless, Olivia. You're hurting. Don't pretend you understand me." "I understand loss." She stilled. "My father died building tracks in Kansas," he continued. "Cave and Company paid my mother less than the coffin cost." Her anger wavered. "Then why?" she demanded. "Why work for them?" "Because someone inside has to demand better." She searched his face for deception. Found none. "You're fighting the wrong battle," he said softly. "And you're fighting it alone." "I don't need anyone." "That's a lie." The words hung between them, charged. For a moment, neither moved. Wind stirred the tall grass around them. "You want revenge," Cyrus said. "But revenge doesn't rebuild anything. It only leaves more ruins." "And what would you know about rebuilding?" she whispered. He stepped closer still, Close enough, she could see the faint scar along his jaw. I know. It starts with choosing something different. Her breath caught. He wasn't just talking about the railroad. He was talking about them. I can't forgive them, she said, voice breaking for the first time. I'm not asking you to. Then, what are you asking? He held her gaze, steady and unflinching. Give me a chance to prove it doesn't have to be the same. Her heart pounded, torn between fury and something dangerously close to hope. In the distance, the locomotive whistle sounded low and mournful. Olivia realized with sudden clarity she no longer wanted to destroy the railroad. She wanted to change its course. And that meant trusting the one man she had sworn to hate. The valley did not forgive East. Word of the second explosion spread fast, and within days, armed guards arrived from Cheyenne, hard-faced men hired by the company to protect assets. They set up watchposts and questioned townsfolk with suspicion sharpened like knives. Olivia felt the walls closing in. Cyrus found her near the creek at dusk. They're sending an executive from headquarters, he said without preamble. Name's Barrow. We wants arrests. For what? She asked coolly. For sabotage. The word lingered heavily between them. She didn't deny it this time. I can't shield you if this continues, Cyrus said. Barrow isn't interested in fairness. He's interested in examples. Then, let him try, she replied, though her pulse betrayed her calm. Cyrus stepped closer. This isn't bravery anymore, Olivia. It's self-destruction. She stared out over the half-built rail line, slicing through the prairie. You said someone inside has to demand better, she said quietly. So demand it. I am, he replied. But I need leverage. She turned to him slowly. What kind of leverage? He hesitated, then spoke carefully. Land rights, compensation contracts, workers' safety clauses. If local landowners unite and refuse cooperation, Barrow will have to negotiate. You think they'll listen to a widow they see as trouble? I think they'll listen if the engineer stands beside her. Her breath caught. You'd risk your position.
Yes.
The answer came without hesitation. For the first time since Daniel's death, Olivia felt the weight of her anger shift into something else. The town hall meeting was tense. Farmers filled the benches, hats in hand, murmuring anxiously. Barrow stood near the front, silver watch chain gleaming against his waistcoat, expression polished and cold. We will proceed with or without cooperation, he declared. The railroad is inevitable. Cyrus stepped forward before doubt could claim him. Not without revisions, he said firmly. Barrow's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? This valley deserves fair contracts, Cyrus continued. Safety inspections overseen locally. Written compensation for any injury or death. A ripple moved through the crowd. Barrow scoffed. You overstep your authority. Then, fire me, Cyrus replied evenly. But you'll delay this project months while you find someone else, willing to manage men who no longer trust you. All eyes turned to Olivia as she stood. My husband died because you cut corners, she said, voice steady but carrying. I won't let another family bury their future for your profit. Silence followed. Then one farmer rose. She's right. Another nodded. We sign nothing without terms. Barrow's jaw tightened. You'll regret this, he warned. Perhaps, Cyrus said calmly. But you'll regret ignoring us more. The standoff stretched long enough for tension to thicken like smoke. Finally, Barrow exhaled sharply. Draft your revisions. The room erupted in relieved murmurs. Olivia felt her knees weakened, not from fear, but from the realization that something had changed. She hadn't destroyed the railroad. She had forced it to bend. Later, beneath the sky-streaked gold and crimson, Olivia stood beside Cyrus along the quiet stretch of track. It's not perfect, he said. But it's better. She nodded. I never thought I'd fight for a railroad, she admitted softly. You weren't, he said. You were fighting for fairness. She studied him. And I was fighting for the chance to build something worth staying for. The meaning wasn't lost on her. Wind brushed her hair across her cheek. He reached up instinctively, tucking it back with gentle fingers, before seeming to realize what he'd done. But she didn't step away. I was ready to hate you, she confessed. I know. And now, he said quietly. I hope you might see me differently. Her heart pounded, but not with anger this time. You stood beside me, she said, when you didn't have to. I wanted to. She stepped closer, boots brushing his. You changed the course, she murmured. So did you. For a long moment, the world felt still. No whistles, no explosions, no ghosts of the past. Just open sky and possibility. Olivia reached for his hand. It felt steady, warm, real. And for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't built on grief. The railroad would continue, but so would she. And this time, she wouldn't be standing alone. The first train to cross the completed line did not arrive with thunder. It arrived with restraint. The valley gathered along the tracks, under a wide blue sky, farmers standing shoulder to shoulder with workers who had once feared losing everything. The rails gleamed in the sunlight, no longer a scar, but a promise forged differently. Olivia stood beside Cyrus, near the front of the crowd. The new contracts had been signed. Compensation clauses written in ink, too bold to ignore. Safety inspections mandated monthly. Barrow had left the valley with tight lips and wounded pride, but he had signed. Cyrus had nearly lost his position for it. But the workers stood with him, and the landowners refused to budge. In the end, the company had chosen profit over pride. Olivia felt Daniel's memory beside her, not as a wound, but as a quiet presence. I never thought I'd see this day, she murmured. Cyrus glanced at her. Regret it. She watched the locomotive approach slowly, steam rising in soft white plumes. No, she said after a moment. I regret how it began, not how it's becoming. The whistle sounded long and low, but it did not carry menace anymore. It carried momentum. The engine rolled forward carefully, across the section where the first explosion had twisted steel months before. The crowd held its breath. The wheels passed smoothly. A cheer erupted. Hats flew into the air. Children laughed. Even hardened ranchers allowed themselves small smiles. Olivia felt something inside her loosen at last. The past had not disappeared, but it no longer ruled her. Later that evening, the celebration spilled into town. Lanterns glowed warmly outside the saloon, music drifting into the street. Cyrus found Olivia standing a little apart from the crowd, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and rose. He slipped away, he said. I needed quiet. He nodded, standing beside her without crowding. Are you leaving? She asked softly. The question had lingered between them for days. His contract allowed transfer. Now that the line was complete, he looked toward the horizon where rails met fading light. I was offered a position further west, he admitted. Her chest tightened, though she forced her voice steady. That sounds fitting. It does. Silence stretched thin. Then he turned to her fully, but I declined. Her breath caught. Why? He held her gaze without hesitation. Because I didn't build this line just to watch it disappear behind me. Her pulse quickened. And what did you build it for? She asked. For a reason. To stay. The words settled between them, like something fragile and precious. You once said, revenge leaves only ruins, she said quietly. It does. And what does staying leave? He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Possibility. The wind stirred gently, carrying distant laughter and music. Olivia searched his face for doubt. Found none. You've changed this valley, she said. So have you. She exhaled slowly. I don't know how to stop grieving, she admitted. You don't have to, he said softly. Grief doesn't vanish. It grows into something else. And what's that? Strength. Memory. Love that lasts differently. Tears pricked her eyes, not sharp with pain this time, but warm with release. For years, she had clung to anger because it felt like loyalty. Now she understood something deeper. Daniel's memory didn't need vengeance. It needed honor, and she had given him that. Olivia reached for Cyrus's hand, fingers threading with his naturally, as though they had always belonged there. The railroad stretched endlessly behind them and forward into the darkening horizon, no longer a symbol of loss, but of movement, of choice, of second chances. Cyrus lifted her hand gently to his lips, brushing a kiss across her knuckles. Stay with me, he said, not as a demand, but as an invitation. She smiled, soft and sure. I already have. Behind them, the locomotive gave one final whistle beneath the stars. Not a warning at the beginning, and as lanterns flickered to life across the valley, Olivia knew this truth. with steady certainty. The railroad had taken her husband, but it had not taken her future. She had reclaimed that herself, and this time she would build something that lasted. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.